Cheaters are everywhere. There are many different types of cheaters, and each one has a unique story to tell. Since we're living in a world where everyone is getting married and divorcing, divorce is a very humiliating ordeal. You lose a lot of self-esteem, but it's good to have friends and family that support you through it all. Life is a precise gift and too valuable to waste on feeling sorry for yourself. Today's story is about husband finally realized although they had been married for 8 years he really didn't know his wife at all. He guessed now he was seeing a side of her that he didn't know existed. Okay, let's go to the story and see what wife did would put their marriage in jeopardy. I think, what in the world am I going to do now? Can I accept what happened last night and go on, or is my marriage to the woman of my dreams over? What I had thought would be a wonderful vacation had now turned into a vacation from hell. My wife Pam and I had rented this cabin on the lake for a week, from Saturday noon until Saturday noon, and it was now only Monday noon. In a couple of hours our friends Bill and Carol would be arriving. They had rented the cabin next to ours. Bill was a salesman and had to meet with a customer this morning and would not be arriving until around 6 this evening. Perhaps for the reader's benefit I should start at the beginning of how this state of affairs happened and give you a description of us. Pam and I, my name is Frank, are both in our early 30s and have been married now for 8 years. We met when I was a senior in college and Pam was a junior. We dated for a year and a half until she graduated, and that summer we were married. After I graduated I went to work for a software company, and 2 years later I started my own company. It's been hard work and a lot of long hours, but this last year the company has really took off and is doing great. Pam also took a job after we were married, and her paycheck was probably all that kept us going during the lean years. She is a legal secretary for a big law firm back home. Since we couldn't afford a child for the last few years she was on the pill. She is the most beautiful woman I have ever known. I'm about 6 feet 2 inches and work out about twice a week. We got here Saturday afternoon after stopping in town for grocery and a case of beer. The weather was beautiful, so after unloading the car and getting the cottage arranged we decided to do a little fishing in the time we had left before dark. The bass were hitting and we caught 3 good-sized ones before we had to come in. I immediately filleted them and Pam made us a nice supper. While Pam was cleaning up I grabbed a beer and went to sit on the porch. That's when I saw this guy pull up at the cottage next door where Bill and Carol would be staying. He carried some stuff into the cottage and in a little while he came back out with a beer in his hand. Wondering what was going on I decided to check it out and walked over to him. I introduced myself and he said his name was Joe. Joe was maybe 2 inches taller than me and probably about 50 pounds heavier. He has the build of a football player. He was with a group of other guys that had a big cottage on a lake about 10 miles away, but the cottage he was to stay in wasn't ready yet, so for some place to stay until Monday he found this one. He knew that they would have the cottage ready for him by Monday noon and that another couple would be arriving Monday for this cottage. At about this time Pam came out and joined us. I introduced them and I kind of noticed that Joe was mighty friendly with Pam and I thought he was undressing her with his eyes. After talking about fishing and the weather and who knows what else for a while we went back to our cottage. When we got back in our cottage I got us both another beer. We sat and made small talk for a while and Pam brought up Joe 2 or 3 times, wondering where he lived and what he did. I wasn't interested in Joe, and after a while, when my beer was gone, I suggested we go to bed. I stripped out of my cloths and got under the covers naked while Pam went into the bathroom. When she came out she had on her nightie. I knew then that I would be having fun tonight. After fun, I held her to me and said we had better get to sleep cause I wanted to be out on the lake fishing at first light. Cuddled together we soon fell asleep. Update: when I woke up Sunday morning it was still dark. Looking at the clock it said 4:30, just perfect. I went to the bathroom soon. After finish I came back to the bed and gently shook Pam, waking her up, and told her that we had some serious fishing to do and to go in the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee while I took a quick shower. After the shower I put on a pair of jeans, a t-shirt and my flip-flops and headed to the kitchen. For some reason Pam had not turned on the light, and as I started to do so she quickly said, "Don't turn on the lights." Looking around in the darkened kitchen I saw her looking out the window. Walking up behind her and leaning over her I looked out the window over her shoulder. The other cottage was only about 20 feet away, and our kitchen window looked right into the bedroom of the cottage next door. There in all his glory stood Joe, with a towel on his head drying his hair. That was what had attracted Pam. I didn't say anything to her. After then I made coffee for each of us. Pam was going to take shower. I asked her to get dressed and to meet me out at the dock. When Pam finally got in the boat I pushed us off and started the outboard motor. Heading across the lake I relaxed and enjoyed the ride. This was always my favorite time of day. Not hot yet like it would be after the sun was up. There was no wind. This was the time for bass fishing. When we got near the shore, I cut off the motor and let the boat drift as I got Pam's rod ready for her. Shifting to the middle seat, I put the oars in the water to put us about 50 feet from the bank and picked up my own spinning rod and started casting. On my second cast, I had a hit and landed a 16 base. Pam also got a hit on about her 5th cast. 2 hours later, we were back at the dock. Pam hadn't done so well. She had only caught that one and I had caught 3. They were all good-sized keepers and would make a delicious meal. Pam had seemed like she couldn't keep her mind on the fishing. Most of her casts were off target and she had got hung up on the lily pads at least 3 times, and one time she even hooked her line on a tree branch on the shore. As I tied up the boat, I asked Pam to go get me a beer while I cleaned the fish. When I got back to the cottage, I saw Pam had changed into her bathing suit. I started hugging and kissing her. She pushed me away and told me to go in the kitchen and fry up some of those fish. She was getting hungry. I didn't mind, as this was the way it always was on these fishing vacations. I did the fish frying. After a good meal and another cold beer, I was content. I just wanted to take a short nap and then get back to the business at hand, fishing. But Pam had other ideas. She wanted to talk. But like last night, the subject still seemed to be Joe. I had noticed her peeking out the window, keeping an eye out for him, but we hadn't seen him yet. I kidded her about wanting to see him again. She got a little huffy and said that she was going outside and get some sun and that I could go ahead and take a nap. When I woke up from the nap, I looked at the clock to see that it was already 3. I jumped up and went looking for Pam. I found her lying on a blanket in back of the cottage. As I approached her, I saw that, like me, she had fallen asleep. She looked a little red from the sun, so I woke her and suggested that she get out of the sun before she burned. Back in the cottage, I asked her to get dressed and we would go back out and do some more fishing. She said she had had enough sun for the day and didn't want to go out on the lake in the heat of the day. She told me to go ahead if I wanted to, and she would have dinner ready for me when I got back. Out on the lake, I again went to the other side because there were no resorts on that side and the pine forest came right down to the water's edge. It was not as much fun out there without Pam, but I went on fishing for close to 3 hours. I didn't have much luck, but then again, this was not the best time of day for fishing. I did caught one by the time I headed back into shore. True to her word, Pam had a nice dinner waiting for me when I got back. After eating and helping her clean the dishes, we went out on the porch and relaxed. Pam surprised me when she asked me if I had any sexual fantasies. I told her yes, it was making love to her. Though she said I mean making love to another woman. I answered her no, I only love you and you're enough for me, and I don't need another woman. Why, I asked, do you have some fantasy I don't know about? You know I loved only you, Frank. I don't want to hurt our marriage or anything. I want us to grow old together, but I want to fulfill my fantasy too. I want your permission to play with Joe tonight. Just this one night. He will be gone tomorrow and we'll never see him again. I felt like my body frozen. I just about doubled over. What? I said, tears coming to my eyes. Please, please don't do this, Pam. You know I love you. I worship the ground you walk on. Please don't do this. Frank, she said, if you really loved me, you would want me to have everything I wanted. You would want me to fulfill all my fantasy, and this is my only one. Please let me spend the night with Joe, just until the sun comes up in the morning. Then I'll come back here and we'll be the same as we've always been. I'll still love you and you'll still love me. Bill and Carol are coming tomorrow night, and they won't know a thing about it, and we can go on with the rest of our vacation as if nothing happened. Please, what about disease? I said, you don't know anything about him. You've already planned that far ahead before you even talked to me. Yes, she said, I had already made up my mind that I was going to do it because I knew that if you really loved me, you would let me. We argued for another half hour, but I couldn't change her mind. To her, if I really and truly loved her, I would let her do it. By this time it was getting dark and Pam had checked out Joe's cottage and had seen him walking around. She asked me to get in the car and leave, saying I could park it somewhere nearby and walk back to the cottage and stay here tonight, but I was not to turn the lights on. That way she could tell Joe that I had business in town and wouldn't be back until tomorrow. By the time I got to the county road that goes by the resort, I could hardly see where I was going because of the tears on my eyes. I turned toward town and drove about a mile, then looked for a place to turn around. Coming back, I pulled into the resort next to ours and found a place to park out of the way. It was about 70 yards through the wood that was behind our cottage to our back door. I went in and laid down on the bed. I didn't know if I had the strength to get up. Did I really want to go look in the window next door and see another man ducking Pam? Or did I want to just lay here and imagine it? Update 1. Thanks for all the suggestions and feedback. One feedback wrote me that he would immediately leave her and file for divorce. He also said that he hated those stories that the husbands were always humiliated in story. All I can say is that I finally realized, although we had been married for 8 years, I really didn't know Pam at all. I guess now I was seeing a side of her that I didn't know existed. I awoke Monday morning looking at the clock. I saw it was already 10:30. Pam said she would be back first thing this morning, but I saw no sign of her yet. 5 minutes later, Joe and Pam came out and went to his car. When she came in the door, she saw me and rushed over to me, throwing her arms around me. She intended to give me a big kiss on the lips, but at the last second I turned my head away. "Oh God, I love you, Frank," she said. "Thank you for the most fantastic night of my life." "Don't thank me, Pam," I said. "I didn't have anything to do with it. If you remember right, I asked you not to do it. In fact, I begged you not to go. And look at you now. You look like a ducked-out whore." "Oh, please, Frank," she said, "don't be that way. It's over now and we can go back to the way we were. I've lived out my fantasy, and that's all I wanted." "Well," I said, "you're right about one thing. It's over now. Our marriage may be over too, but even if it's not, it will never be the same again." Pam looked at me with the beginning of a shocked expression on her face. "I loved you, Pam," I continued, "and I begged you not to be unfaithful. What did you do? You told me you didn't care what I thought and you were going to do it no matter what I said. Where was your love for me, Pam? It looks to me like there was no love for me, that it was all for Pam and what she could get for herself." Pam started to cry now and she sobbed. "I do love you, Frank, only you. It's come in my mind when I saw Joe. I love you, Frank, and I love the way you make love to me. But I couldn't get Joe out of my mind. It wasn't love, Frank, it was lust." Looking at her, I felt sick. "Why don't you go and take a shower and clean all that off yourself?" I said. "Then we are going to have a long talk about our future, whether our marriage can withstand what has happened. Please, Frank, I do love only you. Last night was just lust. It's you I love. Now we can go on as if nothing happened." "How can we go on as if nothing happened last night?" Pam then walks into the bedroom, lies down on the bed, still crying. "Go take a shower first," I said, "before you get the bed all dirty with all that." "I'm too tired now," Pam says. "I don't think I slept more than 30 minutes all night. I'll just take a short nap and then I'll take a shower, and we can have our talk." She was asleep already. Reaching down, I picked up her robe and reached into the pocket. There was a business card with Joe's name and telephone number on it. I thought about tearing it up but decided not to. It might be a good test of her faithfulness. If Pam decided to contact Joe sometime in the future, I figured I would find out about it soon enough. There was no way I would make love Pam now, at least until I was sure that she did not have some kind of STD. Going back outside, sat in a lawn chair, looked back at the cottage next door. How I wanted to hate Joe, but could I really blame him? How would I have reacted if a beautiful woman had come up to me and told me she wanted me to duck her? Although I am happily married and have no desire to cheat on my wife, I know I would have been sorely tempted to do just that. So how can I blame Joe? No, my problem was with Pam. Can I ever trust her again? Does she really love me, truly love me, or will she be tempted to stray again? Going back into the cottage, I gave a lot of thought to just packing up and going home, with or without Pam. But I had really been looking forward to this vacation for at least the last 4 years. It's been that long since we had a real vacation, not just a weekend away from home. No, I decided I was going to stay and have a lot of fun fishing with Bill and Carol, even if my heart was breaking. I figured I would be fishing by myself most of the time, not with Pam as originally planned. I didn't know yet what I was going to tell Bill and Carol about Pam. At this point, I still didn't want them to find out about what Pam had done. That much decided for now, I went into the second bedroom to see about a place to sleep tonight. I was sure I wouldn't be sleeping with Pam in the same bed. Finding sheets and pillowcases, I made up the bed and then went back to the other bedroom, where Pam was still asleep. I gathered up all of my clothes and transferred them to the other bedroom. As I finished putting them in the closet, I heard a car pull up outside. Going to the window, I saw that Bill and Carol had finally arrived. Going out to greet them, I tried to act as normal as possible. I didn't want them to see how bad I really felt. "Well," I said, "I see you two finally made it." When I got closer, I saw that there was a third person in the back seat. "What are you doing here?" Bill said. "I figured you and Pam would be out on the lake fishing when we got here." "Oh, we also brought Carol's sister with us. Jane meant my best friend Frank." As she got out of the car, I couldn't help but notice how good she looked. "Hello, Frank. Nice to meet you," she said. "Hi, Jane," I said. Looking at her, I didn't think she was more than a teenager. But I knew Carol was 30, so she had to be older than she looked. Meanwhile, Carol came around the car and asked, "Where's Pam? And what wrong with you? Your eyes are all red and bloodshot." I didn't think she would see that so soon. Trying to think fast, I said, "It must be all this fresh air. I think my allergies are acting up a little. Pam's not feeling too good right now," I told them. "The last I saw of her, she was sacked out fast asleep." "Hey, you people, I need some help here to carry all this stuff in," Bill said as he lifted a suitcase out of the trunk. We all went to help him. Bill and Carol went into the front bedroom and put their luggage on the bed. I guess the back one will be Jane's room, the room that Pam fulfilled her fantasy last night. She would be sleeping in the bedroom directly across from our kitchen window. Maybe I'll get lucky like Pam, I thought. Bill came in with a couple of groceries and put them on the kitchen table. Grab your tackle, Bill. Let the girls unpack and let's get some fishing done, I said. Sure, if it's all right with them, he said. You guys go ahead, Carol said. We can get everything shipshape here better without you two around. Get your gear, Bill, I said, and I'll meet you down at the dock. Going back to our cottage, I went in the bedroom where Pam was still sleeping. I started shaking her to wake her up. What? Pam said. You had better get cleaned up, I said, if you don't want Carol to see you looking like a whore. Bill and Carol are here and Bill and I are going fishing now. Carol might be coming over to see you soon, so I suggest you get cleaned up or she's going to have a pretty good idea of why you don't feel good. Going out to the dock, I saw that Bill was already there ready to go. I shoved us off, then Bill started the motor and we headed across the lake. At this point I didn't much care what happened to Pam. If she was embarrassed or humiliated, all I can say is tough titty, said the kitty when the milk turned sour. She made her bed, now she can lie in it. Once we were across the lake, Bill turned the motor off and I started rowing to keep us within casting distance from the shore, slowly heading toward the upper end of the lake. We both started casting, and since it was about 7 o'clock I figured we had about an hour until we needed to head back. Bill was first to hook a big one, a 19-inch bass that must have weighed about 4 pounds. After putting it in the live net and dropping it over the side, Bill seemed in the mood to talk. I'm sorry about bringing Jane along, he said, but Carol and I decided that this is what she needs. Time away from the stresses of home and everything. Her divorce was final last week and she has been so depressed lately that Carol was worried about her health. She told Carol that she had been crying so much she couldn't sleep and didn't even feel like eating. She's divorced. I asked. She hardly looks old enough to be married. Yeah, he said, she doesn't look her age, but she's 26. She caught that scumbag of a husband of hers with another woman, right in her own bed. I think he had been cheating on her ever since the day they got married 3 years ago. Damn, I said, that's tough. A cheating spouse can cause a lot of pain and heartache. We'll have to cheer her up while we're here this week. Since the divorce is final, the hard part is behind her. Now she just needs to get over it and get on with her life. Yeah, that's what we've been telling her. She needs to find something else to think about other than her divorce. Bill said, she's a good-looking gal. I said, I'm sure there are hundreds of men out there who would love to get to know her. If she could get a new love interest, I'm sure that would take her mind off her troubles. I don't know, Bill said. She talks like she will never trust another man for a long, long time. She said she's sworn off men. I think it would take someone special now to get her interest. Well, stranger things have happened, I said, but this vacation should help. Getting away from home and out here on the lake fishing. Getting close to nature, it should relax her and give her something else to think about. We then resumed our fishing, and in the next hour we each caught a couple more bass, enough for a good meal. The sun was gone by the time we returned to the dock. After we put everything away and filleted the fish, I told Bill to take them and enjoy their meal. When I got back to our cottage, I was a little surprised that Pam was all cleaned up. She was wearing slacks and a turtleneck sweater to cover the bruises and hickeys. She immediately asked if I wanted some supper. I took a quick shower while she prepared a meal for us. I ate in silence, thinking about all that I wanted to say to her and how I was going to say it. After eating, I grabbed a beer and went and sat down in the front room. Pam cleaned up the kitchen and then joined me in the front room sipping on a glass of red wine. I guess now is as good a time as any for that long talk you mentioned, she said. But first I want to tell you that it is only you I love. Last night was just lust and the chance to live out my fantasy. It's over now and we can go on from here as if nothing happened. That is, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Oh, so that's the way it is. You think all there is to it is for me to forgive you and all will be well again. You have no regrets about humiliating me. You have no regrets about fooling me. You think all I have to do is forgive you and everything will be as it was again. You have no idea of how much hurt and pain I suffered last night. How can I ever trust you again? How soon will it be before you want to live out another fantasy? Please, Frank, she sobbed. I didn't think what I did would put our marriage in jeopardy. I thought you might even enjoy seeing another man make love to me. Well, one thing's for sure, Pam, I said. I'm not one of those men. I hated it. If I ever even think you have been with another man, our marriage is over. It might even be over now. I haven't made up my mind yet. Do you realize that you not only put our marriage in jeopardy, you also put our lives in jeopardy? Do you know how many sexually transmitted diseases there are out there? And as soon as we get home, you will get tested. One thing's for sure, for the rest of this vacation we are not having sex. Though Frank, she was crying now. "Frank," she said, "I enjoyed it, but like I said, it's over. I'm sorry I hurt you so, but it will never happen again. I've lived out my fantasy, and now I just want to go back to the way we were before, as if nothing happened. I want you to know now that if it does happen again that our marriage is over. You know that, don't you? We can never go back to the way we were before it happened, Pam, because it did happen. I loved you with all my heart, but now I'm not so sure. You're going to have to earn that love and trust back by your faithfulness in the future. And I'm going to tell you right here and now that I might have a fantasy to live out myself sometime in the future. You might find yourself in the same boat I'm in right now, and I expect you to be just as forgiving. I won't like it, Frank," she said, "but maybe I can understand your feelings a little." Update 2. The next morning, before daylight, I slipped into the kitchen just to look over at Jane's bedroom. I must have been too early, for her room was still dark. Turning on the light, I started to make coffee. Later, as I was sitting at the table sipping my coffee, Pam came out of her bedroom. She was again dressed in her slacks and turtleneck sweater. I told her if she was going fishing with me that she would get really hot after the sun came up wearing all those clothes. She said she didn't feel like fishing and that I could go without her. I told her about Bill and Carol and about Carol's sister Jane and asked her if she wanted to go down to the dock with me and meet them. "No, Frank," she said, "they're your friends, not mine. Just tell them I'm still not feeling good and wanted to sleep in today. I'll meet them later when I'm feeling better. Besides, I'm still sore and I hate wearing these long clothes to cover up the bruises." By the time I got down to the dock with my thermos of coffee and my fishing tackle, Bill was just finishing walking his motor on the boat he and Carol would be using. "The girls will be down soon. Where's Pam?" "She's still not feeling too good. She said she wants to sleep in this morning and hopes to feel better tomorrow." I said, "Well, in that case," Bill said, "why don't you take Jane in your boat so Carol and I can fish together and it won't be so crowded as 3 in a boat." I don't know how much Jane knows about fishing. She said she hasn't gone fishing since she was a little girl. Her dad loved to fish. I think Carol got that from him, but she said Jane never seemed to care much for it. "You may even have to teach her how to cast, especially with these open-face spinning reels. That was one job I wasn't looking forward to, so I'll be glad to palm it off on you." He laughed. "I'm sure it won't be too bad." I said, "If she knew how to cast with one of those old casting reels, she should pick it up real quick. One advantage of these spinning reels is that you don't get those backlash problems." We stood around and talked for a while, waiting for the girls. We discussed where we wanted to fish. I told Bill that I had been going across the lake and fishing the far bank where there were no cottages and the woods came right down to the water's edge. Bill thought he and Carol would stay on this side for now and just work the bank toward the spillway at the south end of the lake. About that time, Carol and Jane came down the path to the dock. Bill told them what we had decided and Jane laughed and asked if I knew what I had let myself in for. After Jane got in the boat, I pushed us off. Starting the motor, I pointed us toward the far side of the lake. I used this time to get a better look at Jane. She was a real good-looking young girl, looking more like 18 or 19 instead of 26. I knew I had better keep my mind on fishing and not on Jane, or I would embarrass myself for sure. As I sat there thinking about Pam and the pain I still felt in the pit of my stomach because of not only what she had done, but also her attitude about it. She still didn't seem to think it was that big a deal. It was just her fantasy. And now it was over and we could go back to the way we were. I really don't think she realizes the pain and humiliation I feel. Maybe, I thought, I should fool around some myself. Maybe I should try to seduce Jane. Have a fantasy of my own, and what a fantasy it would be. Jane was every bit as beautiful as Pam. As I sat there thinking about it, I began to realize that that was a truly bad idea. Bill and Carol are my friends. I'm sure they wouldn't approve of my using Jane to get back at Pam, especially considering the divorce Jane had just gone through. And it wouldn't be fair to Jane either. She would probably end up hating me if she found out I had just used her to get revenge on Pam. No, although it would be wonderful to seduce Jane and make love to her, I would end up behaving just like Pam, doing neither of us any good. When we got to the other side and I shut off the motor, Jane said I would have to bait her hook for her. I laughed and told her we don't use live bait, just artificial lures. All you have to do is cast it out and reel it back in, then do it again and again. Snapping a silver spoon and pork rind on her line, I handed the rod to her. She took one look at the reel and asked me how you cast with this reel. All she had ever seen were the casting reels, which were not at all like this. Snapping a sparkle tail lure on my line, I showed her how to hook the line with your index finger, open the bail, and then cast the same as you did with the old casting reels. But instead of letting off the spool with your thumb, you release the line from your index finger. Just point your finger where you want the lure to go, I said. Sounds easy, she said. Let me try it. She then proceeded to make a mighty cast but didn't release the line in time and made a big splat about 5 feet from the tip of her rod. She then started to change hand to reel it in, but I told her you reel with your left hand with a spinning rod. You don't change hands on the rod. Here, watch me, I said. You don't have to make a big, mighty heave with a spinning rod. Just remember 10 and 2. Take the rod back to 10. Hesitate a second and feel the whip of the rod, then come forward to 2. When you get it between 12 and 1, release the line from your index finger. Okay. Now try it again. On this try she did a little better, but she released a little too soon and the lure went about 30 or 40 feet just about straight up and landed about 20 feet in front of her. Come here, I said, sit here in front of me. Now put your hand on mine and try to get the feeling of how to do it. Timing is everything. As she sat down in front of me, she kind of scooted back against me, and I knew then and there that I was getting a boner. I scooted back a little so she wouldn't feel me and tried to show her how to cast for distance and direction. God, she smelled so good. Her hair smelled like lilacs and she felt so good up against my chest. After a couple of casts she turned and smiled up at me. I think I got it now, she said as she again scooted her rear end back at me. Oh, how I wanted to wrap my arms around her and kiss her at that moment. She laughed as she got up and went back to the front of the boat. Yeah, she said, I got the feeling of how to do it. Update 3. At this time we took a break and I poured us both a cup of coffee. I asked Jane to tell me more about herself and told her that Bill had told me that she had just been divorced. Yeah, she said, I don't know what I would have done without the support of Bill and Carol. They talked me into coming here with them on their vacation when I know that they were looking for a little time to be alone together. In those small cottages they won't have much privacy with me there with them. They also helped me realize that I'm still young yet and have my whole life ahead of me. I figure I might as well live my life to the fullest and enjoy it. Putting away the coffee cups, we begin fishing again. We were nearing the upper end of the lake where there were several streams that fed into the lake. Casting up into the stream and bring the lure back into the lake landed us 2 more good-sized bass. I then noticed Jane squirming around, and then she tells me that the coffee must have gone right through her cause she needed to pee right now if not sooner. I told her I had a can there for me to use, but I didn't figure she wouldn't want to use it. In that case I'd pull onto that sandbar there at the mouth of the stream and she could get out and go back in the trees a little ways and relieve herself. Pulling onto the sandbar, Jane hurried back into the trees. In a few minutes she back and tells me there's a path back in the trees that goes away from the lake and follows the stream. Do you want to see where it goes? She asks. Sure, I say, let's do a little exploring. I pulled the boat further up on the sandbar, and we started out into the trees. Jane showed me where the path was, and when we had followed it for about 1/4 of a mile I saw a grassy knoll ahead of us. When we reached the top of the knoll the sight was unbelievably beautiful. The grass ran down to the shore of a small pristine lake. Old-growth timber, oak, maple, and a lot of birch with its brown and white bark ringed the lake. The lake was maybe a half-mile long, stretching away from us and varying from about 1 to 200 yards wide. There was no sign of human habitation at all around it. It was as pretty as a picture postcard. As we both stared at the lake, the first thought I had was that I'd bet it had never been fished before, or at least not much. Surely the locals knew about it. How else to explain the path? But for the most part it had not been part of the tourist or vacation traffic. This lake is beautiful, I said. It doesn't look like it's ever been fished. Maybe we can portage the boat over here one day this week and give it a try. I'd love to, she said as she turned in my arms and reached up and put her hands behind my head, pulling me down until our lips met. I kissed her. She told me she didn't know what came over her, but she didn't regret it. I just met you yesterday, but I feel like I've known you for a long time. I feel the same way, I said. Bill told me that he thought you had sworn off men, that you didn't want to get into any relationship again, or at least not for a long while. Well, that's true, she said, but for some reason I don't feel that way about you. I don't know if it's because you're a good friend of Bill and Carol. I said, well, if it's the latter, I think we'd better be getting back before something happens that we'll both regret. They're going to think we got lost or drowned. It must be after 1 o'clock already. I think we missed lunch. It was 2 o'clock when we finally got back to the dock. On the way back I asked Jane not to tell Bill and Carol about the lake we had found. We'll keep it as our own secret and try to fish it later in the week. Jane agreed. Bill came down to the dock as we pulled up. He said he was about ready to jump in his boat and go looking for us. When we showed him the fish we had caught, he was duly impressed. Carol and I didn't do too well, he said. Only one keeper. And don't tell her I told you, but she caught it. He then grabbed our fish and said he would clean them and for us to go get something to eat. I gave Jane a hug and kissed her on the cheek and told her how much I enjoyed fishing with her and that I'd see her later. When I got back to our cottage, Pam really let me have it. She glared at me and said, "Where have you been? You should have been back 2 hours ago." I saw you kiss her down at the dock. You just couldn't wait, could you? You think you're going to keep on ducking her all week, don't you? Well, I have news for you. The rest of this week I'm going to be fishing with you. Pam, I said, you got it all wrong. We didn't do anything but fish. You're the one who ducks someone, not Jane. She just got over her divorce and she knows how much pain and humiliation a cheating spouse can cause. You still don't seem to understand that yet. You still think we can just go right back to the way it was before as if nothing happened. After the way you talked about it, I'm sure it's only the first of many. That's why you're so mad. You remember what it was like and so you think Jane and I must be doing it. That pretty well ended any contact I had with Jane for the rest of the week. By the time we got through arguing and I made a sandwich and ate it, Bill, Carol and Jane were back out on the lake fishing. I just went and got a beer and sat outside on a lawn chair and finished off at least 6 more beers. The next morning I again checked Jane's window before daylight, but I never caught even a glimpse of her. Pam insisted that she was going fishing with me, and in fact she hardly gave me a minute alone. Every place I went, she went. This was especially true whenever I was around Jane. In fact, though we would normally leave on Saturday morning, by Thursday evening I was ready to go home. Bill noticed what was going on, and Thursday night as we were sitting down at the dock having a beer he asked what was the matter with Pam. I told him that Pam had a big problem with insecurity. Does she have a reason to be insecure? He asked. I told him that I didn't want to go into details about it, but the answer to his question was yes. We sat there for quite a while just talking and drinking beer. In fact, I was drinking too much. I ended up telling him about the view from our kitchen window into the bedroom that Jane was in. How Pam had seen something that she shouldn't have that started all the trouble. I still didn't tell him what the trouble was, although I'm sure he must have figured that out. The last thing I told him that night was for him to tell Jane how much I enjoyed our one day of fishing together, and then I was sorry that it was just the one day. Update 4. Having packed most of our gear on Friday night, so we could leave early Saturday morning, I was again up early Saturday. Probably by force of habit I went into the kitchen and checked Jane's bedroom window. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. There was Jane, silhouetted by the bathroom light. Later, after going through the cottage one last time to make sure we hadn't missed anything, we went out and got in the car to leave. Bill came out to say goodbye and I told him to thank Jane for me. He looked at me funny and asked me why. I told him Jane would know. As I drove home that day, all I could think of was that this vacation was finally over. The events of the past week still filled my mind. I think at last Pam finally realizes that things weren't the same as they were and probably wouldn't be, at least not for a long time. Living out her fantasy had driven a wedge between us that would be hard to overcome. On the 4-hour drive home, I don't think I spoke more than 2 or 3 words. In fact, that was the way I wanted it. I was still picturing in my mind the show that Jane had put on for me that morning. However, Pam seemed to have the need to fill the silence with a lot of small talk, mostly about our fishing together the last couple of days, the fish we had caught, and how much fun she had. When she ran out of things to say about that, she started talking about what she needed to do when we got home. I knew that my love for Pam had hit rock bottom. When we arrived home, one of the first things I did was log on to the internet to look up all I could find on STDs. Pam, I said, you are the only woman I have ever loved or wanted to be with. Maybe that was the reason it hurt so much when I found out that you didn't feel the same way about me. Oh, Frank, she said, I'm sorry I hurt you so. You are the only one I love. Jill was just a fantasy that I wanted to live out. Now that it's over, I promise that all my love is just for you. I'll never cheat on you again. I love only you. Before leaving for work the following Monday morning, I asked Pam to schedule an appointment with her doctor, and that I intended to go with her. Luckily, Pam's doctor was a woman, so maybe Pam would feel more comfortable with her than with a male doctor. Thursday morning, we met with her doctor, who told us that a blood test would reveal any bacterial infection, but that the viral infections could take up to 6 months to show up. She suggested that Pam come in monthly for the next 6 months for additional blood tests. She explained that a viral infection wouldn't show up on a blood test, but what would show up were antibodies that a person's body manufactured to fight the infection, and that was what they looked for. She made an appointment for us to come in 2 weeks later to get the results of this test. 2 weeks later, we got the good news that Pam didn't have any bacterial infections, and the test for STD was also negative. During the week after her 4th negative blood test, Pam told me she would be late getting home Wednesday. She and a friend of hers, Susie, another legal secretary at the office where Pam worked, were going out for dinner and to talk. She told me Susie was only 22 years old and that her boyfriend was pressuring her to get married. Susie had told her that she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend, but that she didn't feel she loved him enough to get married just yet. Pam said that Susie just needed to talk it out and be sure before she made a lifelong commitment. That Wednesday I fixed my own supper, and then grabbed a beer and started work on some of the work I usually brought home with me but seldom got around to. At about 8 o'clock I heard Pam's car pull into the garage. When she came into the house I asked her if she wanted something to eat or just a beer. Pam just grabbed a beer and then walked into the family room and plopped down in an easy chair and proceeded to tell me all about the problems that Susie was having with her boyfriend. The next Wednesday was a repeat of the last except that the time Pam got home was a little later. For the next 3 weeks after that the same pattern followed except that by then Pam wasn't getting home until after midnight. By the 4th week I was beginning to get suspicious and wanted to find out if what Pam was telling me was on the up and up. When Pam got off work on that next Wednesday I was across the street in a bookstore watching the front door of the law office where she worked. At 5 o'clock on the dot here comes Pam out the door with another woman. They turned and walked about 2 blocks to a nice restaurant and went in. I followed and then slipped into the restaurant. I could see that they had a booth toward the back, so I went to the other side and found a booth where I could see them, but they would have to be looking for me to see me. Their waitress came and they appeared to be ordering a full dinner. When the waitress left them they resumed talking. And as far as I could tell the story that Pam had told me seemed to be true. My waitress came and I ordered a sandwich and a drink. I didn't want to be stuck with a big dinner if they suddenly left. I watched as they ate their meal, talking all the time. When the waitress returned and cleared their table they then ordered a bottle of wine. After the wine came they poured themselves a glass and resumed talking while they sipped their wine. Looking down at my watch I noticed that it was already 7 o'clock. By then I had come to the conclusion that Pam had been telling me the truth. She was merely being a friend to a girl with boyfriend problems. I picked up my check and started toward the cashier to pay. Coming through the door were 2 faces, only one I immediately recognized, Joe. Without pausing they went straight back to the booth where Pam and Susie were still sipping their wine. As they sat down, Joe with Pam and another with Susie, the 2 women turned and greeted them a kiss on the cheek. I guess it wasn't the first time they had met here. I immediately paid my check and went outside and across the street. Not 5 minutes later the 2 couples came out and immediately got in shiny new Buick that was right in front of the restaurant. Before I could move they pulled away from the curb and were gone. My car was 2 blocks away so there was no way that I could follow them. Update 5. The shock of seeing Pam with Joe again was quickly making me sick. I needed to sit down. 2 doors down the street was a bar so I went and drowned my sorrow in a bottle of beer. As I sat there I kicked myself a dozen times in the rear for not tearing up Joe's business card. But then again, I thought, if Pam wanted to cheat she would have found some other way to do so. These thoughts were also making me very angry and I knew that I needed to seek some sort of revenge. Not just aimed at Pam but also some revenge on Joe. After 2 beers and a lot of thought, I made my way back to me car and went home. I was still sick of heart but I had made some plans and so I felt maybe I could come through this for the better. Since Pam had gotten what she wanted, now I would have to get what I wanted. I went to bed and instead of tossing and turning as I expected to I went to sleep and didn't wake up until the next morning. I didn't even know when Pam had returned home. When I got downstairs to the kitchen I found Pam sitting at the table drinking coffee. Surprisingly she looked fresh as a daisy. Her long night didn't seem to faze her. "Hello, sleepyhead," she said. "Have a long hard night last night. I was just about ready to go upstairs and wake you before I went to work." "Yeah," I said. "It was long but it was especially hard." "Oh," she said. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No, not right now. Maybe later we can talk about it," I said. Later that morning I went to a friend of mine who was really into digital photography and asked him which of the new digital cameras was the best for taking pictures in low light conditions. After he told me I immediately went out and got the best one I could find. I then went home and started searching for Joe's business card. I finally found it in her bottom drawer under some sexy underwear, some that I had never seen before. I then went to the dirty cloths hamper and checked for her underwear. I found them in the bottom and the crouch was covered with dried something. Well, here was proof positive if I needed any more. The next Tuesday night Pam told me she was again meeting with Susie on Wednesday after work and would be late getting home. She went on and on about how messed up Susie was and about how she was still trying to help her. Wednesday evening I dressed in black jeans and a black sweatshirt. I picked up the camera and stopped off at a Subway shop and got a foot-long sub and a Coke to go. At 5 o'clock I was again outside Pam's place of work, but this time I stayed in my car. I then followed them as they went to the same restaurant they had last week. I parked well away from the front of the restaurant, but where I still had a good view of the front door. Knowing I had a 2-hour wait I got comfortable and ate my sandwich and drank my Coke. Sure enough at about 5 after 7 here came that shinny new Buick. Joe and another guy named was George got out and went in. 5 minutes later Pam and Susie came out with them, got in the car and they drove away. But this time I was in position to follow them, and keeping 2 or 3 cars behind, I followed them for over a half an hour, finally arriving at a housing addition full of 1950s-style 3-bedroom ranch houses. It was on the opposite side of town from where we lived. Their car pulled into a driveway, and the garage door went up and they drove inside, closing the garage door after them. I continued on down the street for a block and turned around. Coming back, I parked about 2 doors down from the house they entered. It had started getting dark while driving over here, but it still wasn't dark enough to be safe playing a peeping Tom, so I must have sat in the car for about 20 minutes. When I finally started toward the house, I noticed that the yard was full of overgrown bushes and shrubs. They all needed trimmed back some. I guess Joe or George wasn't too good at upkeep of the yard. However, the overgrown shrubbery gave me plenty of cover from prying eyes and made it easy for me to locate the family room, where I could easily see them through the patio door. They had a privacy fence around the backyard, so I guess they didn't feel any need to close the curtains. When I looked in, all 4 of them were knack with Joe and George sitting on a couch. I started taking some pictures, first making sure that the flash was off. I wanted to make sure that I had each of them in a compromising picture where they were identifiable. After I had taken about 30 or 40 pictures, before I had gone very far, I thought I heard the sound of someone running away from me. I couldn't see them, but I was sure there was somebody around who had been watching me. Final update. After I got back to my car, I sat for a while and thought to myself that our marriage was definitely over now. There was no way that I could forgive her now. As I slowly drove for home, I decided to stop at the first bar I came to and drown my sorrow in a Bud Light. I picked a booth toward the back and slowly drank my beer, thinking of what I would need to do to start divorce. I had not been sitting there very long when a very pretty young woman came in and was looking around, as if looking for someone. As I was about the only customer by myself, she made her way back to where I sat. "Can I talk to you, or rather ask you a few questions?" she said. "Sure, I'm just sitting here drowning my sorry," I replied. "My name is Elizabeth. My friends call me Liz. The question I want to ask is, are you a private investigator?" "Who, me? No, I'm just a computer jock." I laughed. "Well, I've been following you since you left that house on Jefferson Street, and I followed you to this bar. But I saw you taking pictures through the patio door there and wondered if you would be willing to sell them to me." She said. "Why would you want pictures of my wife having an affair with a couple of his Hall?" I asked. "Because," she said, "one of those is Hall is my husband." "Oh, I'm sorry. Which one is your husband? Joe or George?" "Joe," she said. "But he won't be for long if I can get a copy of those pictures." "You mean Joe has a beautiful wife like you and he still goes out and jeopardizes his marriage for some woman?" I said. "Sure, I'd be overjoyed to give you a copy of every one of them." "Do you have a computer where we can download them?" "Yes," she said. "If you'll follow me, we can get it done right away." Downing the rest of my beer, I then follow her out of the bar into the parking lot where another new Buick sat. I got in my car and followed her for maybe 10 minutes to a big 2-story house in a fancy, upscale neighborhood. She pulls into the garage and I park behind her on the drive. I then follow her into the house. The inside is beautiful, very tastefully decorated with some of the finest furniture money could buy. "Wow," I say, "Joe is a fool to give this away just to chase other women." "Joe is a fool," she says. "He thinks he's God's gift to women. We've been married 4 years and I don't think he was ever faithful to me. Even on our honeymoon, I caught him accidentally exposing himself to other women. But he's not losing just me. He's losing his job and any claim to our house and most of our savings account." She went on to explain that her father was dead set against her marrying Joe. He told her just what Joe was and what he would do, and sure enough he did just as her father had said. Her father had also insisted that Joe sign a prenuptial agreement before they were married, and in it Joe would be out in the cold if he was ever gave her cause to divorce him. She knew he had been unfaithful to her many times, but never before had she had any positive, physical evidence to prove it. Her father, it seems, was one of the richest men in town, and he owned the largest Buick dealership in the state. Her father had given Joe a job at the dealership, and Joe had gotten George his job. The house where they were screwing around it belonged to George. He inherited the house when his parents died. According to Liz, George was as a box of rocks. He wouldn't even have a job if it weren't for Joe. That made him very loyal to Joe, and he would do about anything that Joe wanted. Now, they would both be out of a job, and she didn't think either of them had any skills to get another one. She took me to a room that looked like a study and showed me her computer. It was one of the best on the market with all the latest features. After downloading all the pictures, we picked the best ones of each of them, where they were easily recognized, and printed them out. Liz then asked me how she could pay me for all I had done for her. I told her that just getting a divorce from Pam and seeing Joe and George lose everything was payment enough. My reaction: "I am really sorry for Frank. He should have left immediately and filed for divorce while she tried another man to fulfill all her fantasies. But Frank seemed like a consistent man. Frank was always scorned in this story for his generosity and love during his 8-year marriage. Divorce is never an easy decision, and you can only imagine the emotional toll it is taking on him. I hope he is able to find a way through this difficult time with as much support as possible, especially since they don't have children involved. Every ending paves the way for a new beginning, and it's your chance to embrace change, learn from the past, and build a brighter future. Believe in yourself, stay stable, and move forward. Your journey is your own, and you have the power to shape it into something beautiful. Every relationship can be incredibly complicated, and it's a reminder that we shouldn't judge from the outside without truly understanding the complexities inside. Thank you for joining us on Revolving Time, where we bring you real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human experience. We hope that our stories have provided you with insights, inspiration, and a renewed appreciation for the power of human resilience. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and stay connected with our community. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories and events, and you'll have access to a library of inspiring content. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we look forward to sharing more powerful stories with you in the future.